Shalom everyone, this is Daniel from Netivyah, and as always, now that I'm back from Finland, we are here in downtown Jerusalem at the Netivyah building. In the last video, I briefly mentioned that the Wall Street Journal had an article about a half dozen sheikhs from Hebron, led by Wahadia al-Jabari, who signed a very interesting letter. In it, they proposed that Hebron secede from the Palestinian Authority, the organization that has led the Saudi and Egyptian Arab tribes that call themselves Palestinians since the late 60s, and instead proclaim Hebron an emirate, like some of the emirates in the Gulf. In other words, a city-state. And they will be in charge of the civilian operation of the city, such as policing, education, and so on. They write that they want cooperation and coexistence with Israel and will recognize Israel as a Jewish state. In the letter, they write that they want to set a timetable for negotiations and would like to introduce an Abraham's Accord-style agreement as replacement for the Oslo Treaty, which, according to them, brought nothing but destruction, death, and financial ruin, and forced the Palestinian Authority on them instead of the authentic and traditional tribal leaderships. The sheikhs propose that Israel allow 1,000, then 5,000, and later expand to 50,000 workers from Hebron into Israel, which is critical for the income of the city. And they will make sure that there is a zero tolerance for terrorism, unlike the Palestinian Authority, which has a pay-to-slay policy. That is, they will pay Palestinians for wounding and killing Jews, and the more they kill, the more they'll be paid. After October 7th, most of the work permits were revoked, so this critical lifeline would need to be restored for the city's sake. Israel is being cautiously optimistic about this new idea, which seems to have been formulated with the knowledge of at least some within Israel, such as Yossi Dagan, the leader of the settlers in Judea and Samaria, who had positive things to say about the sheikh and his father. So we'll see how that develops, but it's interesting. Syria. Let's move on there. The Al-Mayadeen reported that Knesset member Tzachi Hanegbi, head of the National Security Council, met with Syrian President Ashara in Dubai. Sources quoted in the paper added 3 points that came up in the conversation. First, Ashara will give up the Syrian claim to the Golan for Israeli recognition of his government. Second, as part of an agreement, there would be 3 buffer zones in South Syria, one of them in the Dara province, one in the Quneitra province, and one in Sveda, that is the Druze mountain that we've spoken about quite a bit in the last few months. And the third point is that Israel will allow Ashara's security forces to enter South Syria with light weapons. Now, another report from Syria is somewhat less positive, and that is that the Syrian civil agencies have, without any fanfare or announcement, changed the way they register Syrian Palestinians, and they've changed it to calling them Palestinian residents. And this is, of course, referring to descendants of those who reportedly left Israel in 1948 and have now had 2, 3, 4, 5 generations born in Syria. In other words, they are actually not refugees according to international law, but that's beside the point. The change, of course, relates to the future of the so-called Palestinian people and their so-called right to return. But anyways, yesterday it was reported that high-level Israelis will meet with high-level Syrians in Azerbaijan. And interestingly, Syrian President Ashara is in Azerbaijan now. Moving on to Iran. Iran expelled 500,000 Afghans in the last 16 days since the war with Israel, citing unproven claims that they spied for Israel. And I'm just pointing this out because when Israel moves a few tens of thousands of Gazans to keep them out of a war zone, the entire world cries genocide. But when Iran expels 500,000 Afghans in 16 days, the world is silent and you can even hear the crickets. Israeli reporter Barak Ravid, who personally I don't like and have found some of his reporting to be false, but anyways, reported that Russian President Vladimir Putin informed US President Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron that he supports a zero enrichment attitude for any future agreement with Iran and has encouraged the Iranians to move in that direction. Recent chatter from Iran claims that they expect Israel to attack again and are preparing a preemptive strike. Additionally, there was a recent report out of Iran which claimed that they've approved a huge budget for ballistic missiles. Quickly popping into Gaza, The Guardian reported that the US have placed sanctions on Francesca Albanese, the United Nations Special Emissary to the Palestinian territories, who is a huge anti-Semite. In response, she claims that such sanctions are an admission of wrongdoing. To me, such a reply is like someone who is falsely accused being told that by defending himself from a false accusation, he is admitting guilt. In other words, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And it is a foolish and ineffective claim. Now, completely unrelated to diplomacy, but incredibly important to democracy, let's get some news from within Israel. First, I want to mention something about Netanyahu's court proceedings. On July 9th, former deputy head of internal investigations within the Israeli prosecution and current Knesset member Moshe Saada gave a testimony in which he proved that the chief police investigator of one of the 4 cases against Netanyahu had a grudge against the prime minister, who he thought was behind a sexual harassment complaint against him, the police investigator. But the real kicker here is that Moshe Saada proved that he, as deputy head of the internal investigations, reported this information to the district attorney at the time it happened, Yehuda Weinstein, who previously testified against Netanyahu that this was not reported. Saada produced the protocol of the meeting that confirmed his claim that it was indeed reported. And during his testimony, Saada also accused the current prosecutor of standing silent while the prosecution witness, who himself is a former district attorney, lied on the stand. And now moving on to another report. The Supreme Court sent out an official response that only on a few occasions did Chief Justice Amit, who some consider the president of the court, even though he was not elected properly, change the dockets to dictate which judges would sit on which cases, and by that also decide the outcome of the cases. This came in response to claims that he, Amit, is meddling in the docket of the case of the General Security Service head nomination, and also with the backdrop of a new law being proposed that all the judges will be selected randomly. Member of Knesset Simcha Rotman of the Religious Zionist Party responded to the court's declaration, saying that it is like someone saying, "Don't tell me I don't keep kosher. I only eat pig 5 or 6 times a year." Likewise, the court saying, "We act appropriately. We only set the judges on the cases that we care about a few times," is completely okay, which it is not. Once again, it proves how the liberal left system, deep state, high courts, and so on, try to control the outcome of cases, the outcome of what happens, irregardless of democracy and the voters' opinion. For now, that is all we're going to go with. Thank you so very much, and God bless you all. Shalom.